The line required 147 stones. 147 exactly. Not 146, which felt incomplete, or 148, which was a crowd. Each stone had to be slate gray, smooth to the touch, and roughly the size of her thumb. She found them by the edge of the cracked asphalt path that circled the dead grass of Northgate Park. It took her 3 weeks to collect the full set. Now, the ritual could be perfect. Ilara Vance was 8 years old. Every day after school, she walked the 1.7 miles from Northgate Elementary to the park. The journey took 28 minutes if she walked at a steady pace, 34 if she had to stop to tie the worn laces of her sneakers. She knew every crack in the sidewalk, every house with a barking dog, every spot where the weeds grew thickest. Her world was a map of reliable things, of numbers and patterns she could count on. At 4:15 p.m., she would arrive at her spot, a patch of hard-packed dirt behind the rusted slide. She'd kneel, unzip her backpack, and carefully remove the cloth bag that held her collection. One by one, she would place the stones. The line had to be perfectly straight, oriented toward the lone oak tree at the far end of the park. The space between each stone had to be the width of her little finger. No more, no less. This was the work. It was important work. It kept the world from shaking apart. While she worked, her lips moved without sound, counting. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 147. When the line was complete, she would sit back on her heels and watch it, her small body a sentinel guarding against chaos. She stayed until the first streetlight flickered on, a signal that the day's hold was ending. Then she would reverse the process, carefully placing each stone back into its bag, leaving no trace. The ground had to be reset to 0. Other kids came to the park sometimes, their laughter loud and sharp. They ran and screamed, kicking balls and chasing each other around the swing set that only had one swing. They never came near her corner. They saw the quiet girl with the intense, focused eyes and gave her a wide berth. Adults walked by, their faces tired from work. They'd glance at her, maybe a flicker of curiosity, but she was just another piece of the urban landscape. A small, quiet girl playing with rocks. They didn't see the precision. They didn't see the desperation. They didn't see the architecture of a soul trying to build a fortress against the unpredictable storms of her life. Her mother, Awifa, had loud days and quiet days. On loud days, the apartment was filled with frantic energy. Music would blast from the small radio. Awifa would talk for hours about grand plans, moving to Paris, starting a business, writing a novel, her eyes wide and shining. On those days, Ilara made herself small and invisible, keeping to her room, reading the same 3 books over and over. On quiet days, the silence was heavier than any noise. Awifa would be in her bed, the curtains drawn, a still form under a thin blanket. On those days, Ilara was the parent. She would make toast and leave it by the bed. She would make sure the doors were locked. She learned to be silent, to move through the small apartment like a ghost. The park was her sanctuary. The stones were her subjects. The line was her law. Here, she was not a ghost. She was a queen, a general, an architect. Here, she was in control. And for a few hours every afternoon, that was enough. Cormac Mac Brennan saw it all. He was 62 years old, with a beard more salt than pepper, and hands that looked like they were carved from old wood. He wore a black leather vest, heavy even in the early autumn air, with a patch on the back that read, Iron Covenant MC. He had been riding with the Covenant for 22 years, but before that, and during it, he had spent 30 years as a social worker for the city. He'd worked in child protective services, a job that grinds the hope out of most people. It had ground on him too, but it had also sharpened his vision. He knew how to look past the surface of things. The Iron Covenant wasn't what most people thought of when they heard motorcycle club. They were mostly older guys, veterans, retired tradesmen, a few former cops. Their community work was their church. They adopted parks, ran toy drives, and provided quiet, no-questions-asked support for families on the brink. Mac's unofficial role was lookout. He had a sixth sense for kids who were falling through the cracks. He'd first noticed the girl a month ago. He saw the way she walked, with a purpose that was too heavy for a child. He saw the tension in her small shoulders. And then he saw the ritual with the stones. It wasn't play. He'd seen it before in 100 different forms. The kid who organized his food by color. The girl who had to tap every doorway 3 times. It was a coping mechanism. It was a child trying to build order where there was none. It reminded him of himself so many years ago. His own mother, lost in the fog of a depression no one had a name for back then. He remembered the desperate need to make his bed with perfect military corners, to line up his toy soldiers in flawless rows, believing that if he could just get the outside world right, the chaos inside his home might calm down. It never did, but the ritual helped him survive. So Mac watched. He didn't intervene. Not yet. The first rule of his old job, the one that mattered most, was to never charge in. You observe. You learn the rhythm of a person's life. You earn the right to enter their space. For 3 weeks, he just sat on the farthest bench, reading a worn paperback, his Harley-Davidson parked by the curb like a sleeping beast. He was just a part of the landscape, another old guy killing time. But he was watching. He saw the straightness of the line, the focus in her eyes, the deep, shuddering breath she took when the last stone was in place. He saw a child holding her world together with pebbles and will. He wasn't going to let her do it alone for much longer. He knew the weight of that kind of work. It was too heavy for a child to carry. He knew because he had carried it himself, and he still had the scars. If you believe that no child should have to carry the world on their own, hit that subscribe button. Every story we share is a reminder that there are people who see, people who care. Comment the name of your city to show where this message is being heard, and share this with someone who needs to know that kindness is still out there, waiting on a park bench. The first move had to be hers, even if she didn't know she was making it. Mac knew that direct engagement would send her scattering like a startled bird. So, he changed his own pattern. One Tuesday afternoon, he arrived before her. In his pocket was a small, smooth stone he'd picked up from the shore of the lake 2 years ago. It was a perfect piece of granite, worn into a soft oval by 1,000 years of water, a deep, calming gray. He walked over to the patch of dirt where she performed her ritual. He didn't disturb the ground. Instead, he placed his single, perfect stone about 10 feet away from where her line usually ended. He set it down gently, a silent offering. Then he retreated to his usual bench and opened his book. Ilara arrived at 4:16 p.m. She knelt, unzipped her bag, and froze. Her eyes, sharp and practiced, immediately registered the foreign object in her space. It was an anomaly, a breach in the system. She stared at the stone for a full minute, her body rigid. Mac didn't look up from his book, but he could feel her tension from 50 feet away. He kept his breathing slow and even. Don't react. Let her process. She eventually began her ritual, her movements a little stiffer than usual. She laid out her 147 stones, her back turned to the new one. But she knew it was there. Mac could see her flicking her eyes toward it every few minutes. When her line was complete, she didn't settle into her usual quiet observation. She kept looking at the new stone. It was an unanswered question. When the streetlight flickered on, she packed her stones away as always. Then, she walked slowly over to the granite oval. She circled it twice. She nudged it with the toe of her sneaker. Finally, she bent down, picked it up, and slipped it into her pocket. She didn't look at Mac. She just turned and walked away. The next day, Mac was there again. He didn't bring another stone. He just sat. Ilara arrived, and this time she seemed to search for something before she began. A flicker of disappointment crossed her face. She began her ritual. But this time, after her 147 stones were laid, she took the granite oval from her pocket. She held it for a moment, then placed it at the very end of her line. A period at the end of a sentence. Stone 148. She had accepted the offering. She had expanded her world by one single stone. For Mac, it was a seismic event. It was the beginning of a conversation. The next week, he moved to a closer bench. Ilara noticed but didn't react. A few days after that, he brought 2 granola bars. He ate one slowly. He left the other, still in its wrapper, on the bench beside him when he left. He drove away, watching in his rearview mirror. He saw her small form dart over, snatch the bar, and run from the park. It was a victory. Trust wasn't a wall you knocked down. It was a bridge you built, plank by plank, over a terrifying canyon. And the builder had to be willing to stand on their side for as long as it took for the other person to feel safe enough to take the first step. The tests came, as he knew they would. One Thursday, she didn't show up. Mac waited until dark, a knot of professional anxiety tightening in his gut. Was she sick? Was it a quiet day, or a loud one? He had no right to know, no right to check. All he could do was be there. He came back the next day. The park was empty again. The knot in his stomach grew. He fought every instinct from his old job that told him to escalate, to call someone, to do something. His job now was different. His job was to wait, to be a fixed point. On Monday, she was back. She looked pale, and there were faint, bluish shadows under her eyes. She walked to her spot and looked toward his bench. He gave a slow, small nod. That was it. No questions. No, I was worried about you. Just, I am here. I am still here. He saw the tension in her shoulders release, just a fraction. The test was over. He had passed. He hadn't abandoned the post. Slowly, a new ritual formed around the old one. He'd arrive, sit on his bench, now only 15 feet from her spot, and read. She'd arrive, do her work with the stones, which now included his one offering. Some days he'd leave a piece of fruit or a juice box. Some days, nothing. It had to be inconsistent, so it was a gift, not an obligation. He learned that she liked apple juice, but not orange. She preferred peanut butter granola bars to oatmeal raisin. He learned this through the wrappers left in the trash can. They went 6 weeks without speaking a single word to each other. It was the most meaningful conversation he'd had in years. If you're enjoying this story, hit that hype button right now. It's free, takes a second, and helps this video reach more people who need to see it. Now back to the story. The sky had been threatening all afternoon, a bruised purple-gray that muffled the sound of the city. Mac had brought a large golf umbrella, just in case. The rain started as a light patter, and Ilara didn't seem to notice, her focus entirely on the geometry of her stones. But then, the heavens opened up, a sudden torrential downpour. The hard-packed dirt around her instantly turned to dark mud. She looked up, startled, as the first big cold drops hit her face. She made a move to gather her stones, to protect them from the deluge. Before she could, a shadow fell over her. Mac was standing there, the huge black umbrella held over her and her perfect line, creating a small dry island in the middle of the storm. He didn't speak. He just stood, his arms steady, the rain drumming a loud rhythm on the taut fabric above them. Ilara stared up at him, her eyes wide. Water dripped from his beard. His leather vest was dark with rain. He was getting soaked, but she and her stones were perfectly dry. They stood in that shared silence for what felt like an eternity. The world washed away around their small sanctuary. Her voice, when it came, was so quiet he almost didn't hear it over the rain. "Today is my birthday." Mac's heart, a tough old muscle accustomed to abuse, gave a painful lurch. He kept his face calm, his voice even. He looked down at her. "Happy birthday, Ilara." "I'm 8. "That's a good age," he said. "A very important age." "My mom forgot." Her voice was flat, a simple statement of fact. "She's having a quiet day." He understood her code. A quiet day was a bad day. A day when the world outside the bedroom door ceased to exist for her mother. He thought of all the platitudes he'd heard people offer over the years. "I'm so sorry." "That's awful." She didn't mean it. All of them were useless. They were salt in the wound. What a child in that position needed was not pity. They needed validation. "Sometimes remembering is hard for people," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That doesn't make your birthday any less important. It's still your day. It belongs to you." He decided to offer a piece of himself, a small plank for the bridge. "My mom used to forget things too. Birthdays, holidays. It wasn't because she didn't love me. Her mind was just... It was a loud place, full of static. It was hard for her to hear anything else through the noise." Ilara looked up at him, really looked at him, her gaze locking with his for the first time. The guarded, watchful expression was gone, replaced by a raw, searching vulnerability. "I made her breakfast," she whispered. "Toast with jam. I left it for her. She didn't eat it." The devastating simplicity of it almost brought him to his knees. An 8-year-old girl, trying to parent her own mother on her own birthday. He didn't offer comfort. He offered truth. That was a kind and loving thing to do, he said, his voice thick with emotion he fought to control. "A really good thing." She looked down at her muddy sneakers, but she didn't eat it. No, she couldn't. And that's the hard part. Both things can be true at the same time, Ilara. You can do a wonderful, kind thing, and the person you do it for can be too sick to see it. Her not eating it doesn't make your kindness any smaller. It's not your fault. It was never your fault. She stared at him, her small face awash with a confusion that was slowly turning into something else. Understanding. Relief. No one had ever told her that before. No one had ever explained that two opposite things could exist at once. Her mother's love and her mother's neglect. Her own goodness and her mother's inability to receive it. The rain began to soften, the drumming on the umbrella easing to a gentle tap. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. He saw a tiny crack appear in the fortress she had built around herself. It was the beginning of the thaw. A single, silent tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek, a clean track in the dust. He pretended not to see it. He just kept holding the umbrella, keeping her safe from the storm. If Bike Diaries has become part of your week, consider joining the channel membership. Just a couple bucks a month keeps these stories coming. The link is right down below. And please, hit that hype button if you haven't already. It truly makes a difference. Now, back to the story. Mac knew that a bridge with only one pillar on each side was a fragile thing. He was one pillar. She was the other. But a real, lasting bridge needed more support. It needed a community. He brought it up at the next Iron Covenant meeting, held in the garage of their president, a retired mechanic named Sal. He told them about Ilara. Not the whole story, just the parts they needed to know. A little girl, 8 years old, carrying too much. A mom who was struggling. He wasn't asking for a dramatic rescue. He was asking for the kind of help the Covenant specialized in. Subtle, steady, and anonymous. "We need to build a net under this family," he said. "So if one of them falls, they don't hit the ground. The guys didn't hesitate. They were men of action, but they understood the need for a light touch. One of the members, a building contractor named Dave, happened to get a city permit to fix up Northgate Park. The first thing he did was repair the broken swing and put up a second one beside it. Another member, who owned a small grocery store, started packing an extra box of essentials every week: canned soup, pasta, bread, milk, and fresh fruit. Mac would pick it up and drop it at a local community food pantry, with a note earmarking it for the Vance family, care of the pantry director, a woman Mac had worked with for years. No charity, just a neighborly boost. Mac also made a call. He dialed the number of a young, smart social worker he'd mentored before he retired. He gave her the address. "I've got a situation," he said. "A mom, Aoife Vance. I think she's fallen off her meds, deep in a depressive episode. The daughter, Elara, is the primary caregiver. She's 8. Mom's not a danger, she's just gone. She needs a wellness check, but from a place of support, not accusation. Can you connect her with a mobile crisis unit, maybe some in-home family support services? Frame it as helping her." He was using the system he knew so well, but from the outside, directing resources without making an official report that could risk separating them. The goal wasn't to remove the child, it was to heal the family. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, things began to change. The grocery deliveries meant there was always food in the apartment, one less thing for Aoife to worry about when she surfaced from the fog. The visit from the crisis team was gentle. They found a woman drowning in shame and isolation. They didn't threaten or judge. They offered help. They connected her with a psychiatrist who made house calls and a support group for mothers with mental health challenges. Aoife Vance was not a monster. She was a woman with a broken brain, fighting a war no one could see. She loved her daughter with a fierce, desperate passion that her illness often smothered. The small scaffolding of support the Covenant built around her gave her just enough leverage to start fighting back. She started taking her medication again, consistently. The quiet days became less frequent, less deep. The loud days softened into something more manageable. Elara felt the shift. There was milk for her cereal in the morning. Her mother started sitting with her at the small kitchen table for dinner, asking quiet questions about her day. One afternoon, Aoife walked with her to the park. She didn't stay long, but she came. She watched from a bench as Elara laid out her stones. It was a monumental step. Elara's lines in the dirt began to change too. They were still precise, but now they had curves. One day, Mac arrived to find she had arranged her 148 stones into a giant, perfect spiral. It was still about order, but it was a gentler, more expansive kind of order. It was the shape of hope. He sat on his bench and watched her, and for the first time in a long time, the ache in his own heart felt a little lighter. The net was holding. 2 months to the day after the storm, Mac came to the park with a small, lumpy package wrapped in brown paper. It was a Tuesday. Elara had just finished a complex wave pattern with her stones. He walked over and sat on the ground a few feet away from her, a move that would have been unthinkable before. "I know I'm a little late," he said, his voice soft. "About 8 weeks late, but the thought is still good." He held out the package. She looked at the package, then at him. Her hands remained in her lap. She was still a child who didn't know how to receive things. "It's for you," he said gently. "For your birthday." She slowly reached out and took it. Her fingers fumbled with the tape. Inside was a small, plain cupcake with white frosting from the bakery near his house. A single, unlit candle was stuck in the middle. She stared at it. It was the first birthday cake she had ever had. "Do you have to make a wish?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Only if you want to. You're in charge. What do people wish for? He thought for a moment. Anything, I suppose. Something you want for yourself, something you want for someone else. Sometimes they just wish for more good days, for hope. She looked at the small, perfect flame after he lit it with an old Zippo. Her face was illuminated in the warm, flickering light. She was quiet for a long time, her expression serious and intense. Then, she took a deep breath and blew. The flame vanished into a wisp of smoke. She didn't eat the cupcake. Instead, she set it carefully on the ground, stood up, and took 2 steps toward him. And then she did something that cracked the old social worker's heart wide open. She wrapped her thin arms around his waist and pressed her face into the worn leather of his vest. It was an awkward, clumsy hug. A hug from a child whose body didn't know the language of casual affection. She was stiff, uncertain, as if trying to assemble a piece of furniture from confusing instructions. But it was real. He could feel the frantic, bird-like beating of her heart against his ribs. He froze for a second, stunned. Then he slowly, gently, raised his own arms and enclosed her in a hug, one hand resting softly on the back of her head. He could feel her small body trembling, a storm of emotion she had no words for finally breaking free. He closed his eyes, the smell of rain-soaked dirt and little girl shampoo filling his senses. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path through the wrinkles by his eye. He held her, this fierce, fragile, brave little girl, and he didn't let go until she did. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a cure. It was a beginning. It was the first step onto the bridge, a trembling, tentative step into a world where it was safe to lean on someone else. Thank you for watching this story about Ilara, a little girl building order out of chaos, and Mac, a biker who understood the language of stones. Her story is a quiet reminder of the millions of children who live in the shadow of a parent's mental illness, becoming caregivers long before they should have to. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, 1 in 5 children in the U.S. have a parent with a serious mental illness. These children are at higher risk for emotional and behavioral problems, but they are also incredibly resilient. The most important factor in their well-being is a stable, supportive relationship with at least one caring adult. That adult can be a teacher, a neighbor, a family friend, or even a bearded biker on a park bench. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to show up. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out. You can contact the NAMI helpline at 1-800-950-NAMI or text NAMI to 741741. For resources on supporting children of parents with mental illness, visit organizations like the Children of Parents with a Mental Illness COPMI website. Your presence can be the one fixed point in a child's spinning world. Subscribe to Bike Diaries for more stories about the quiet heroes on 2 wheels. Hit that hype button to help this video find the people who need it most, and if you want to support what we do, the membership link is right below. Please, share this with everyone who needs to remember that the most powerful thing you can offer someone is to simply see them. 3 months later, the lone oak tree in Northgate Park was a blaze of orange and red. The air was crisp with the promise of winter. Ilara still came to the park every day after school, but her ritual was softer now. Sometimes she made lines, but more often she created spirals, circles, and shapes that had no name. She used her stones, but she also incorporated fallen leaves, acorns, and brightly colored feathers she found. Her art was less about control, more about creation. Mac was always there, on his bench. Sometimes she'd sit with him for a while before she started her work. They didn't talk much. They'd just sit in comfortable silence, watching the dogs chase squirrels and the wind shake the last leaves from the trees. He taught her the names of the clouds: cumulus, cirrus, stratus. She taught him that the best skipping stones were the flattest ones. Her mom was getting better. There were still quiet days, but they were shorter, and Ioife was learning to ask for help before the silence became too deep. She was attending her support group twice a week. She had started drawing again, her sketches filling a notebook on the kitchen table. The apartment felt lighter. One afternoon, Elara came to the park not with her bag of stones, but with a piece of paper folded into a neat square. She handed it to Mac. He unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing, done in crayon. A very large man with a scribbled gray beard and a black vest stood next to a small girl with long brown hair. They were holding hands. The man was smiling. The girl was smiling too. A huge, wobbly, gap-toothed smile. Above them, a bright yellow sun shone in a blue sky. He looked at it for a long time, his throat tight. "It's good," he said, his voice raspy. "It's very good." She pointed a small finger at the drawing. "That's you," she said, "and that's me." He nodded, unable to speak. She didn't need to say anything else. The picture said it all. The journey wasn't over. The path ahead was still long and uncertain, but she wasn't walking it alone anymore. Not every day was a good day. Not yet. But she was learning to hold hope without being held hostage by it, and that was its own kind of freedom.